She arrived at Hever Castle with nothing but a worn leather satchel and a letter of employment that promised salvation or ruin. Cora M. Welch, 28 and desperate, never imagined that accepting a position as governess would lead to the most dangerous love of her life. When Duke Gilberto D. Quick finally shattered his 2-year silence, his words would break every barrier between them. "Don't leave me, I'm begging you. Don't leave us." But what could drive a man of absolute power to his knees before a woman society deemed beneath him? Hello, lovely. If you're finding yourself drawn into this historic romantic tale from the past, I'd be ever so grateful for your support. It helps me share more stories of love, longing, and history with kindred spirits like yourself. And if you're up for it, do tell me in the comments where you're reading from. I treasure every note, and it never fails to bring warmth to my heart. Spring, 1855, Kent, England. The carriage wheels carved deep ruts into the muddy country road as Cora M. Welch pressed her gloved hand against the rain-streaked window. Each rotation of the wheels seemed to echo the pounding of her anxious heart. The spring storm had arrived with sudden fury, transforming the Kent countryside into a watercolor painting where earth and sky blurred together in shades of grey and deeper grey. At 28, Cora had long abandoned the romantic notions that might have colored such a journey in her youth. Yet something about the approaching silhouette of Hever Castle stirred an inexplicable mixture of dread and anticipation in her chest. The ancient stone fortress emerged from the mist like a monument to grief itself, its turrets reaching toward heavy clouds that promised no mercy, no respite from the deluge. She smoothed the wrinkles from her charcoal traveling dress with trembling fingers, the finest garment she owned, though it had seen better days and countless mendings. The fabric was respectable but worn at the cuffs, a testament to her circumstances. Her chestnut hair, usually so neatly arranged, had begun to escape its pins during the long journey from Bristol, and her hazel eyes reflected both exhaustion and a stubborn determination that had carried her through darker days than this. The letter lay in her lap, creased from repeated readings, as though the words might change if she examined them often enough. Duke Gilberto D. Quick's correspondence had been brief, almost curt. Governess needed immediately, previous instructors unsuitable, generous compensation, discretion essential. Those final 2 words had given her considerable pause. Discretion essential. What secrets did this household harbor that required such careful silence? But desperation, Cora had learned, made bold decisions easier to justify. Her position at the girls' school in Bristol had ended with shocking abruptness when the headmistress discovered Cora had been secretly teaching the kitchen maids to read a kindness considered unseemly and dangerously above their station. Revolutionary ideas, Mrs. Pemberton had called them, her face pinched with disapproval. "We cannot have someone of your radical inclinations influencing our young ladies." The memory still stung, though Cora harbored no regrets. Those kitchen maids had deserved the gift of literacy as much as any well-born girl. More, perhaps, for they would need every advantage their harsh lives might afford them. Her modest trunk, strapped to the back of the carriage, contained all her worldly possessions, a few gowns, some books, her sketching materials, and her mother's pearl earrings, the only items of value she possessed. It wasn't much to show for 28 years of living, but it was hers, earned through her own efforts, and she wore her independence like armor. Thunder rumbled across the hills as the carriage lurched over a particularly deep rut. Cora caught herself against the seat, her heart hammering. Through the rain-blurred window, Hever Castle loomed larger now, its stone walls dark and forbidding. There was something unutterably melancholy about the place, the wild, untended gardens visible even through the downpour, the windows that seemed to stare like sorrowful eyes, the general air of abandonment that clung to the ancient stones. "Not much farther now, miss," the coachman called over his shoulder, his voice barely audible above the storm. "Hever Castle lies just beyond that ridge." Cora nodded, though he couldn't see her, and swallowed the knot of apprehension lodged in her throat. She had accepted this position knowing nothing of the family beyond what the letter revealed. A duke, a child in need of instruction, generous compensation that would allow her to rebuild her ruined reputation, perhaps even save enough to open her own small school someday, one where kitchen maids and duchesses' daughters might sit side by side. But as the carriage crested the final ridge and Hever Castle stood fully revealed before her, Cora felt the weight of premonition settle over her shoulders like a cloak. This was no ordinary posting. This was a house wrapped in sorrow so thick she could taste it on the rain-soaked air. The carriage rolled to a stop before massive oak doors that looked capable of withstanding a siege. Before Cora could gather her satchel, the doors swung open, and a figure emerged, a stern-faced woman in black bombazine, her silver hair pulled into a knot so severe it seemed to pull the disapproval right into her features. "Miss Welch, I presume," the woman said, her voice carrying the crispness of fresh ice despite the warm spring rain. "I am Mrs. Blackwood, head housekeeper of Hever Castle. His Grace is away on estate business. You will meet the child immediately." No welcome, no warmth, no offer of tea to ward off the chill, just efficiency edged with warning. Cora stepped down from the carriage, her worn boots splashing in a puddle. "Thank you for receiving me, Mrs. Blackwood. I look forward to this way." The housekeeper had already turned, clearly expecting Cora to follow without further pleasantries. The entrance hall took Cora's breath away, not with grandeur, though there was plenty of that, but with its oppressive silence. Her footsteps echoed on marble floors as she followed Mrs. Blackwood through corridors lined with ancestral portraits. Generations of stern-faced nobility stared down at her, their painted eyes seeming to judge and find her wanting. But it was the silence that truly unsettled her. In a house this size, there should have been sound servants moving about their duties, distant voices, the normal rhythm of domestic life. Instead, Hever Castle felt like a beautiful tomb, where even the air seemed afraid to move too freely. "The previous governesses," Mrs. Blackwood said without turning, her voice echoing off the stone walls, "lasted 3 weeks, 5 weeks, and 9 days, respectively. The child is challenging. Her mother's death changed her, changed them both." She paused before a heavy door adorned with carved roses, their stone petals frozen in perpetual bloom. When Mrs. Blackwood turned to face Cora, something in her stern expression had softened just barely, but enough to reveal genuine concern beneath the harsh exterior. "Miss Ruby will not speak," she said quietly. "She has not uttered a single word in 2 years. Not since the day her mother drowned in the lake beyond the East Garden." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with unspoken tragedy. Cora's breath caught in her chest. A mute child, a grieving duke, a house wrapped in suffocating sorrow. This was what discretion essential had meant. "I see," Cora managed, though her voice sounded thin to her own ears. "Thank you for telling me, Mrs. Blackwood." The housekeeper's eyebrow lifted slightly, as though surprised by Cora's composure. "His Grace dines alone at 8. You are not expected to join him. Your chambers are prepared on the 2nd floor. I trust you'll manage your own unpacking." "Of course." Mrs. Blackwood pushed open the door. The nursery was surprisingly bright, despite the storm outside. Tall windows overlooked a vista of gardens and, beyond them, a lake whose surface reflected the turbulent sky like liquid mercury. Rain streaked the glass, distorting the view into something almost dreamlike. In the corner, hunched over a small writing desk near the window, sat a girl of perhaps 9 years. Her hair, the color of burnished copper, hung in 2 neat plaits down her back, and her dress, though immaculate in its construction, was as colorless as the gray sky outside. She wore mourning still, Cora realized. 2 years later, and this child still wore the gray of grief. In her small hands, she clutched a worn music box, which she closed with a soft click the moment Cora entered. Ruby J. Donovan turned to regard the new governess with eyes that were ancient, with pain eyes that had seen too much, understood too much. For someone so young, her gaze held the suspicious assessment of a much older soul, one who had learned that hope was a dangerous thing, and trust even more so. "Good afternoon, Miss Ruby," Cora said softly, making no move to approach. She had learned long ago that frightened creatures, whether children or wild things, needed space to make their own decisions about trust. "My name is Cora Welch, and I've come to be your teacher. But more than that, I'd very much like to be your friend if you'll have me." For the briefest moment, something flickered in Ruby's eyes, surprise, perhaps, or the faintest spark of curiosity, before her expression shuttered closed like the music box in her hands. She turned back to the window with deliberate finality, dismissing Cora as effectively as if she'd slammed a door. Mrs. Blackwood sighed, the sound heavy with resignation. "You see, impossible. His Grace returns in 3 days. You'll meet him then." She swept from the room, her bombazine skirts rustling with barely concealed exasperation, leaving Cora standing alone in the heavy silence. But Cora didn't follow. Instead, she moved quietly to the window seat across from Ruby, careful to maintain distance while positioning herself where she could see both the child and the haunting lake beyond. She set down her satchel and retrieved a small leather journal battered from years of use and a stub of charcoal. Without a word, without expectation, Cora began to sketch. She drew the view from the window, the outline of the lake, its surface rippling with rain, the weeping willows that draped their branches like mourners dressed for a funeral. She added details slowly, methodically, the curve of the shoreline, the distant hills, small birds perched on willow branches despite the storm. Minutes passed. The only sounds were the scratch of charcoal on paper and the steady drum of rain against glass. From the corner of her eye, Cora noticed that Ruby had turned slightly, watching her draw with an intensity that suggested the child was starving for something connection, perhaps, or simply the novelty of someone who didn't demand speech or performance. Cora continued sketching, pretending not to notice the small figure gradually shifting position for a better view. She added more birds to the willow trees, robins and wrens, and a solitary dove. She drew ripples on the water that suggested life moving beneath the surface. She transformed the scene from one of sorrow to one of continuation, of nature's refusal to stop simply because human hearts had broken. When she finally looked up, Ruby was openly staring at the sketch, her expression no longer guarded but raw with something that looked painfully like longing. Cora carefully tore the page from her journal and held it out, not moving closer, not invading Ruby's space, simply offering. For a long moment, nothing happened. The rain continued its percussion against the windows. The grey afternoon light filtered through the room, soft and forgiving. And then, slowly, so slowly, Ruby stood. She walked across the nursery with trembling steps, her small hand reaching out to take the paper with fingers that shook like autumn leaves. She studied the drawing intently, her copper head bowed over the sketch, as though it contained some secret message only she could decipher. When she looked back at Cora, silent tears were streaming down her pale cheeks. It was the lake where her mother had died, the place of her worst nightmare, her deepest trauma, and somehow this stranger had drawn it not as a place of tragedy and ending, but as a place where life continued, where birds still sang, willows still swayed, the world still turned despite the unbearable weight of loss. Ruby didn't speak. The silence remained unbroken, but she nodded once, a tiny gesture, barely perceptible, yet somehow monumental. And in that moment, in that small room overlooking a lake that held such terrible memories, something shifted. It was subtle, fragile as spider silk, but real nonetheless. A crack had appeared in an impenetrable wall. 3 days of progress. The spring rain had given way to tentative sunshine by the morning of the third day, and with it came the first fragile shoots of connection between governess and child. Cora established no formal lessons she had learned long ago, that wounded hearts needed gentleness before they could bear the weight of conjugations and arithmetic. Instead, she told stories while Ruby listened from her window seat, initially distant but gradually drawing closer. She spoke of her childhood in Cornwall, of her father's small lending library, where she had spent countless hours lost in volumes that promised escape from their modest circumstances. "Papa believed books were bridges," Cora said softly one afternoon, her fingers busy with charcoal and paper. "Bridges between souls, between worlds, between who we are and who we might become." Ruby's drawings told their own story, a narrative of slow emergence from darkness. The first sketches were all storms and drowning figures, rendered in violent strokes that made Cora's heart ache. But by the third day, tentative light had begun to appear, a single star piercing storm clouds, a bird rising from turbulent water, the smallest suggestion of hope creeping back into a shattered world. The music box moment came unexpectedly. Ruby had been clutching it constantly, but on the second evening, she slowly wound the mechanism and let the haunting melody unfold between them, a waltz in a minor key that spoke of lost beauty. "Your mother must have loved you very much," Cora whispered. Ruby's dam broke. She flew across the space between them and collapsed against Cora's shoulder, her small body racked with silent sobs that had been held prisoner for 2 years. Cora simply held her, rocking gently, offering what words could not, the promise of safety, of acceptance, of a place where grief need not be hidden or contained. "His Grace has returned." Mrs. Blackwood's announcement sent an unexpected flutter through Cora's chest. She smoothed her charcoal dress, still her finest, though now she wished desperately for something less threadbare, and followed the housekeeper through corridors that seemed darker than before, as though the master's presence cast shadows the servants' efforts could not dispel. Cora had imagined an elderly nobleman, perhaps wizened with grief and age. She was utterly unprepared for the man who commanded the study she entered. Duke Gilberto D. Quick stood at the window with his back to her, but even in silhouette he projected an intensity that made the cavernous room feel suddenly smaller. When he turned, Cora's breath caught traitorously in her throat. He was perhaps 35, with dark hair falling carelessly across his forehead as though he'd run his fingers through it too many times. His eyes were the color of storm-tossed seas, grey-green and turbulent, holding depths she dared not fathom. Handsome, certainly, but carved with such profound sadness that beauty seemed almost irrelevant. He wore grief like a second skin, and beneath it, Cora glimpsed a man who had forgotten how to live. His shoulders, though straight, carried an invisible burden that made him seem simultaneously imposing and unbearably fragile. "You haven't fled." His voice was low, rumbling like distant thunder. He stood with his back to her still, addressing the rain-streaked window rather than his new employee. "Remarkably patient or remarkably foolish, Miss Welch?" Cora lifted her chin, refusing to be intimidated. "Perhaps I see potential where others see impossibility, Your Grace." He turned then, and the full force of his gaze fell upon her. For just a moment so brief she might have imagined it, surprise flickered in those storm-colored eyes before the shutters came down, leaving only aristocratic assessment. "Ruby doesn't speak, doesn't play, barely eats." His recitation was clinical, as though discussing a stranger rather than his own child. "She wakes screaming from nightmares she cannot describe. Previous governesses found her unmanageable." "What makes you think you will succeed where they have failed?" "Because Ruby is not broken, Your Grace," Cora said quietly. "She is wounded, and wounds, given proper care and time, can heal." Something shifted in his expression, the smallest softening around his mouth, a loosening of the rigid line of his shoulders. But it vanished as quickly as it came, replaced by formal dismissal. "Report to me weekly on her progress. Mrs. Blackwood will arrange the particulars." Cora moved toward the door, then his voice stopped her. "Miss Welch," he still didn't turn, "do not give her false hope. Do not make promises you cannot keep." Beneath the warning, Cora heard the plea a man who had lost everything, terrified to lose what little remained. That evening, Duke Gilberto D. Quick stood in the shadowed corridor outside the nursery, watching through the partially open door as the new governess read to his daughter. Ruby sat close to Miss Welch, closer than she'd sat to anyone in 2 years, her copper head tilted with rapt attention. And there, impossible, a small smile ghosted across her pale features as the governess changed her voice to mimic different characters. The Duke's hands gripped the doorframe until his knuckles went white. Memory assaulted him, Arabella reading to infant Ruby in lamplight, her voice musical with joy. The guilt cut sharp, being drawn to another woman felt like betrayal of everything sacred. Yet he couldn't deny what his eyes showed him. Ruby responding, engaging, in ways no previous governess had achieved. His chest tightened with warring emotions, hope and fear, gratitude and resentment, and beneath it all, something dangerous he refused to name. "She's reaching her," he whispered to the darkness. "God help me, she's actually reaching her." 4 weeks transformed Hever Castle in ways both subtle and profound. Ruby began responding with gestures, small nods, shakes of her copper head, and occasionally her lips would form words though no sound emerged. It was progress measured in whispers and shadows, but progress nonetheless. Cora introduced watercolors during their afternoon sessions, and they took nature walks through the gardens when weather permitted, pressing flowers between the pages of heavy books. Ruby's artwork evolved like a caterpillar emerging from its chrysalis, the dark storms giving way to tentative sunshine, drowning figures replaced by children dancing in meadows. During a sudden thunderstorm one evening, Ruby reached for Cora's hand with trembling fingers and held on as though anchoring herself to solid ground. From the corridor, the Duke watched these small victories with a heart caught between gratitude and torment. His internal conflict intensified, daily joy at his daughter's healing warring with something far more dangerous he refused to name. "The child smiles now, Your Grace," Mrs. Blackwood reported one morning, her stern features softening with genuine wonder. "I haven't seen that in 2 years." The Duke nodded, unable to speak past the emotion lodged in his throat. But beneath his gratitude churned confusion about feelings that had nothing to do with Ruby's progress and everything to do with the governess's gentle hands, her quiet strength, the way lamplight caught the chestnut highlights in her hair. Mrs. Blackwood entered the Duke's study bearing more than her usual morning correspondence. Her expression held the careful neutrality of someone delivering a serpent wrapped in silk. From Reverend Thornton in Bristol, Your Grace, regarding Miss Welch. The letter's contents struck like a physical blow. Dismissed for inappropriate fraternization with lower classes, teaching kitchen maids to read above their station, revolutionary ideas about women's education. But darker revelations followed. Cora's father, Thomas Welch, had been a radical pamphleteer arrested for publishing seditious materials against the Crown. He died in prison. Cora herself had been investigated, though never charged for potentially assisting his treasonous activities. The Duke's hands trembled as he set down the letter. He felt deceived, yet understanding bloomed alongside anger. How could she have revealed such a past? What employer would have hired her? One must wonder what else she's hiding, Your Grace, Mrs. Blackwood said pointedly. To his own surprise, he found himself defending her. She has done nothing but help my daughter. Whatever her father's sins, they are not hers to bear. The housekeeper's eyebrow lifted, but she said nothing more. Late that evening, Cora stood among the library's towering shelves, selecting volumes for Ruby's lessons. The lamplight cast long shadows that danced like accusatory fingers across leather spines. The Duke entered like a storm given human form, the crumpled letter clenched in his fist, barely controlled fury radiating from every line of his body. Is it true? His voice was dangerously low. Your father was a traitor? Cora's face went pale, but her chin lifted with the same stubborn dignity that had carried her through worse trials. She refused to cower. My father believed knowledge shouldn't be the province of the wealthy alone, she said, her voice steady despite the trembling of her hands. He believed every person, man or woman, rich or poor, deserved the tools to think freely, to question, to grow. If that makes him a traitor in your eyes, then yes, I am proud to be his daughter. You lied to me. The Duke took a step closer. You concealed your past, just as you omit details about your wife's death, Cora countered, reckless now with anger of her own. Why? Ruby stopped speaking, the guilt eating at you like acid. They stood barely an arm's length apart, both breathing hard, the air between them crackling with dangerous electricity. The Duke's face went white. You know nothing. I know Ruby was with her mother when she drowned. Cora's words tumbled out before wisdom could stop them. You were supposed to be there, but weren't. I know you blame yourself, and Ruby carries that blame like a stone around her neck, dragging her down into the same waters that took her mother. The silence that followed was deafening. When the Duke finally spoke, his voice was raw, breaking like waves against jagged rocks. My wife, Arabella. The confession poured from him like blood from a wound too long bandaged, how Arabella had grown melancholic for months after Ruby's birth, retreating into shadows the servants whispered about but no one understood. Doctors called it hysteria, prescribed rest and laudanum, never grasping the true darkness consuming her. He had planned that day at the lake to lift her spirits. He was supposed to join them, but estate business kept him away. When I arrived, his hands clenched and unclenched at his sides. Arabella was wading deeper, her skirts weighing her down like anchors. Ruby was screaming on the shore, so small, so helpless. By the time I reached Arabella, it was too late. Ruby saw everything. She's never forgiven me. His voice dropped to a whisper. I've never forgiven myself. Cora's anger dissolved like sugar in rain. She reached out, her hand gentle on his arm, an intimacy that should have been improper but felt inevitable. It wasn't your fault, wasn't it? His anguished eyes met hers. I knew she was struggling. I should have been there. You cannot protect anyone from the demons in their own mind, Cora said softly. Your wife was truly ill, something darker that no one understood then or now. Ruby's silence isn't punishment for you. It's self-protection from enormous pain she has no words to express. They stood close in the lamplight, two wounded souls recognizing the scars in each other. The awareness crackling between them was no longer just anger, but something far more dangerous: understanding, connection, the beginning of something neither could acknowledge. You should still leave, the Duke whispered, though his eyes begged her to stay. The scandal of your father will touch you only if you let it, Cora interrupted. We all have pasts, Your Grace. The question is whether we let them define our future. The moment stretched between them like a silk thread, fragile, dangerous, impossible to sever. The grand carriage that rolled up Hever Castle's drive 3 days later was as ostentatious as its occupant, all gleaming lacquer and gilt trim. drawn by matched greys that pranced like dancers. Lady Marguerite Ashworth descended with the presumption of royalty, her formidable beauty wrapped in the latest London fashions. She was perhaps 40, with sharp intelligence burning in calculating eyes that missed nothing. Her resemblance to the late Duchess was striking enough to make the Duke flinch. The same fair colouring, the same delicate features, but where Arabella had been soft and melancholic, Marguerite radiated brittle control. "Gilberto." She swept past him into the entrance hall without waiting for invitation. "I've come to oversee Ruby's upbringing as Arabella would have wanted. The child needs family guidance." Her gaze fell upon Cora, who had emerged from the nursery at the commotion. "And who might you be?" "Miss Welch, the governess," Cora replied evenly, though something in Marguerite's tone made her skin prickle with warning. "Ah, the governess." The dismissal in those 3 words was absolute. Marguerite turned back to the Duke, her voice sharpening. "My sister would be horrified at how you've let this household deteriorate into a mausoleum of grief. Ruby needs proper care, proper discipline." The Duke's welcome was polite but strained, his shoulders rigid with tension. "Marguerite, while I appreciate your concern—" "Concern?" she laughed, the sound like crystal shattering. "This is family obligation, Gilberto, something you seem to have forgotten in your wallowing." Cora withdrew silently, but not before catching the flash of something predatory in Marguerite's eyes, a hunger for control that had nothing to do with Ruby's welfare and everything to do with power. The man who accompanied Marguerite made Cora's blood run cold. Dr. Cornelius Finch was a prominent child psychologist, his reputation built on papers about hereditary madness and moral degeneracy. He was tall, cadaverously thin, with eyes that observed Ruby during afternoon lessons as though she were a specimen pinned beneath glass rather than a wounded child. Ruby, who had been mouthing words while arranging pressed flowers, froze under his clinical scrutiny. Her small hands trembled, and she pressed closer to Cora's side. After 20 minutes of silent observation, Dr. Finch delivered his assessment in the drawing room, his voice devoid of compassion. "The child exhibits symptoms of moral insanity. This prolonged mutism, combined with her mother's documented melancholia, suggests hereditary madness. I recommend immediate institutionalization." Cora's breath caught in her throat. "Treatment in a proper facility, Doctor," Finch continued, "where such cases are handled with scientific rigor. The longer she remains in this environment, the more entrenched her condition becomes." The Duke's face had gone ashen, but uncertainty flickered in his storm-colored eyes. Was he harming Ruby by keeping her here? The doubt was a poison, and Marguerite knew it. They gathered formally that evening, the Duke, Marguerite, Dr. Finch, and Cora, who had been summoned to provide her own assessment. Dr. Finch laid out his findings with methodical precision. The morbid drawings from Ruby's first weeks, her prolonged mutism, her withdrawal from normal childhood activities, all symptoms point to a deteriorating mental condition requiring immediate intervention, he concluded. Cora could remain silent no longer. "Ruby is not insane," she said, her voice steady despite the trembling in her hands. "She is traumatized. There is a vast difference." "Doctor," Finch's smile was patronizing, condescending in its gentleness. "And you are qualified to make such diagnoses, Miss Welch?" He let the question hang before delivering his calculated blow. "I understand you come from a family with radical politics. Your father was a convicted traitor, was he not? Such revolutionary thinking often clouds judgment regarding proper social order and medical science." Marguerite seized the opening like a predator scenting blood. "This woman has filled your head with romantic notions of healing, Gilberto. Ruby needs professional intervention, not amateur kindness from someone whose own family harbored seditious tendencies." She produced legal papers with theatrical precision. "I am seeking to contest your guardianship. I have the support of our family solicitor and several members of Parliament who are concerned about Ruby's welfare." The Duke's face was tortured, every line carved deeper by impossible choice. "I need time to consider." "You don't have time." Marguerite's voice cracked like a whip. "Every day in this house of death, she deteriorates further. Sign the papers voluntarily, or face a court petition that will drag this family's tragedy through public scrutiny." The ultimatum hung in the air like an executioner's blade. After the meeting dissolved in tense silence, the Duke found Cora standing in the shadowed corridor, her composure finally cracking. "You cannot let them take her," Cora whispered fiercely. "Ruby is healing, I swear it. Everything, Doctor." Finch said it's wrong. It's based on outdated theories about heredity and madness that have nothing to do with grief and trauma. The Duke's anguish was palpable, radiating from him in waves. What if I'm wrong? What if keeping her here is selfish? What if she needs help I cannot provide, and I'm clinging to false hope because I cannot bear to lose her too? Cora reached out and took his hands, the first deliberate touch between them, crossing every boundary of propriety. His fingers were cold, trembling. "Trust yourself," she said urgently. "Trust her. Trust what you've seen these past weeks, the smiles, the gestures, the progress that is real and measurable." For a moment, they stood connected by more than clasped hands, by shared purpose, shared fear, shared hope. "And if I'm trusting the wrong person?" The Duke's voice was barely audible. Hurt flashed across Cora's face, but she steadied herself. "Then you'll have made a mistake, but abandoning her to an asylum would be an unforgivable one. That choice cannot be undone." She released his hands and stepped back, leaving him alone in the corridor with Marguerite's ultimatum hanging over him like storm clouds pregnant with lightning. Ruby couldn't sleep. The castle felt different that night, heavy with words unspoken, decisions waiting like executioners in shadows. She wandered the corridors in her white nightgown, small bare feet silent on cold stone, drawn by voices drifting from her father's study. The door stood partially open, and through the gap she saw them gathered like judges. Papa, Aunt Marguerite, the frightening man with cold eyes. "The child needs proper treatment." Aunt Marguerite's voice was sharp, certain. "Institutionalization is medically necessary." Dr. Finch's clinical tone made Ruby's stomach twist. "Asylum," the word repeated like a bell tolling. Ruby knew that word. Cook's sister had gone to an asylum and never come back. Places where broken people were sent to disappear. Her father's voice was uncertain, questioning, "But she's shown progress." "You're deluding yourself," Marguerite interrupted, just as Arabella deluded herself before the end. A flashback crashed through Ruby's mind. Mama's face the morning she walked into the lake, that terrible empty smile. "If I'm broken like Mama, I'll disappear too." Silent tears streamed down Ruby's cheeks as she backed away from the door, her small heart hammering against her ribs. In the nursery, the music box sat on the table where she'd left it. Ruby wound it with trembling fingers, and the haunting melody filled the room, bringing memories that threatened to drown her. "Sometimes sadness is too heavy to carry, my darling," her mother's voice soft and sad. Ruby understood now. She looked out the window at the moonlit lake, its silver surface like a mirror, reflecting answers she couldn't speak aloud. If Mama found peace there, maybe she could too. Maybe if she went where Mama went, the pain would finally stop. Maybe Papa wouldn't have to worry about his broken daughter anymore. She opened the window. Cool night air rushed in like permission. The ground-floor nursery made escape easy. Ruby dropped into the garden, wet grass cold against her bare feet, and walked toward the east garden. The lake glimmered in the distance like a destination, like an answer to questions too terrible to ask. Cora found the nursery door ajar, music box playing to an empty room, window gaping open with curtains billowing like ghosts. Small wet footprints on the windowsill. "No, no, 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 Ruby." Her scream tore through the castle. She ran through corridors, downstairs, barefoot in her nightgown and wrapper. Servants stirred. Mrs. Blackwood emerged, but Cora didn't stop. "Ruby's gone. The lake, she's gone to the lake." Thorns tore her feet as she ran through gardens. Please God, not this child, not again. The moonlit path felt endless, her lungs burning, heart threatening to burst. Ruby stood in shallow water, exactly where her mother had been. Her white nightgown soaked dark at the hem, her face turned to the surface as if hypnotized. Cora forced herself to stop, breathe. "Ruby, darling, please, step back. Come to me." Ruby turned. In the moonlight, her face was a mask of anguish beyond her 9 years. Her mouth opened, and sound emerged raspy, broken, each word clearly painful. I couldn't save her. Mama kept walking, and I couldn't." Sobbing now. "Why did she leave me? Why wasn't I enough?" Cora waded in without hesitation, cold water shocking. She gathered the sobbing child into her arms. "Oh, my darling girl, you were always enough. Your mother was sick in a way that had nothing to do with you. She loved you, that's why she told you to stay. She saved you, Ruby." The Duke crashed through the willow curtain, alerted by servants. He saw them in the water, Cora holding his daughter, both weeping, and heard Ruby's words. the first in 2 years, laying bare the guilt they'd all carried. Something broke in his chest. He splashed in without thought for his boots or formal clothes, his arms encircling them both. "I'm sorry, Ruby, I'm so sorry. I should have told you every day it wasn't your fault. Not yours, not mine. Your mother was ill. We couldn't save her, but we can save each other." Ruby clung to them both. "Papa, I missed you." His sob tore through the night. 3 broken people clung together in water where tragedy had happened, transforming it into a place of rebirth. Cora met the Duke's eyes over Ruby's head, unspoken understanding. Love neither could deny. They emerged together, Ruby between them, holding both their hands, speaking in halting whispers as they walked back to the castle. 2 weeks after the lake incident, Ruby's progress was undeniable. She spoke in short sentences now, her nightmares decreasing, genuine smiles lighting her face like sunrise after endless storm. Marguerite witnessed this recovery and realized her grounds for petition were crumbling. She changed strategy with calculated precision. The legal papers arrived via magistrate's clerk, their contents devastating. Duke Gilberto D. Quick, deemed unfit, due to compromised judgment from inappropriate romantic attachment to employee of questionable character. The Duke's solicitor reviewed the case with grim expression. "Lady Marguerite has built a surprisingly strong case, Your Grace. Character witnesses Reverend Thornton, Dr. Finch, several society ladies. The scandal of Miss Welch's father will be central to their argument." For the first time since Arabella's death, the Duke felt genuine panic. He could actually lose Ruby. Preparation for court. Ruby's terror manifested the moment she learned they were leaving for London. "They'll take me away, won't they?" Her copper braids trembled as she clutched Cora's hand. "Never," Cora promised, though fear coiled in her own chest like a serpent. The solicitor's coaching was brutal in its pragmatism. Do not show emotion. Be factual. Do not appear romantically involved. The painful irony wasn't lost on either of them. They were falling in love but couldn't acknowledge it even to each other. The night before departure, the Duke found Cora crying in the library. His hand settled on her shoulder, warm and steady. "Whatever happens, you saved her. Remember that." Cora turned into his embrace, their first real one, and for a moment they simply held each other, drawing strength from what they couldn't name. They pulled apart before the kiss could happen. Too much at stake. The London townhouse felt cold and unwelcoming. The night before the hearing, the Duke found Cora on the terrace, moonlight silvering her chestnut hair. "If we lose tomorrow," he began. "We won't lose," Cora interrupted fiercely. "We can't." The wood-paneled courtroom was packed with society observers, drawn by scandal like moths to flame. 3 magistrates sat in judgment, their faces impassive as stone. Dr. Finch testified first, his clinical assessment damning: hereditary insanity, morbid artwork, tainted bloodline requiring institutional treatment. Reverend Thornton painted Cora as a radical, bringing questionable morals into a ducal household, implying without evidence that she'd seduced the Duke for position. Lady Marguerite's testimony was masterful. A neglectful father consumed by guilt, his judgment compromised by unseemly attachment to a governess of low birth. She produced witnesses who'd seen Duke and Cora in intimate moments, garden walks, library meetings. "My sister's daughter deserves better than a household where scandal brews," Marguerite concluded with theatrical grief. The magistrates turned skeptical eyes on the Duke. "Is it true Miss Welch is the daughter of a convicted traitor? Have you developed romantic feelings for your daughter's employee?" The atmosphere shifted. They were losing. The Duke took the stand and did something unprecedented. He humbled himself completely. "My lords, I have been a poor father. I let grief blind me to my daughter's suffering. I withdrew when she needed me most." "All true." His voice broke. "But Miss Welch did not compromise my judgment. She restored it." He turned to look at Cora, emotion thick in his voice. "She showed me that love is not scandal, that healing is not weakness. She gave Ruby back her voice. She gave me back my purpose. If you find me unfit, I accept. But do not punish my daughter by sending her away from the only person who truly reached her." The magistrate turned to Cora. "Miss Welch, you've been silent. Anything to say?" Cora rose, hands trembling but voice clear. "I am the daughter of a man who believed birth should not determine worth. Judge me unfit for my father's convictions if you must. But judge Ruby only by what you see. A brave young girl who found her voice when someone gave her space to speak." Then Ruby herself stood, small hand clutching Cora's. Her voice was hesitant but growing stronger. Please don't take me away from Papa, and please don't take Cora away from us. She taught me that being sad is not the same as being broken. She taught me I can remember Mama and still be happy. She taught me to live again." The courtroom fell into profound silence. Even Marguerite looked shaken. The magistrates conferred in whispers before announcing, "We will deliver our judgment tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock. Court is adjourned." The agonizing night stretched before them like a sentence waiting to be pronounced. Ruby slept at last, exhausted from emotion, while Duke and Cora remained in the drawing room, fire crackling but offering no warmth against their dread. The Duke poured brandy with shaking hands. Cora stood at the window, watching London's gaslit streets blur through tears she refused to shed. "Whatever happens tomorrow," the Duke began. Cora turned sharply. Please don't say goodbye before we must." He crossed to her, the space between them crackling with years of suppressed feeling. "That's not what I was going to say." "Then what?" Cora whispered. His hands framed her face with trembling reverence. "That I cannot imagine my life without you in it. That somewhere between that first day and tonight, you became essential. That losing Ruby would destroy me, but losing you." He couldn't finish. "Gilberto." The first time she'd used his given name, something broke in him at the sound. He kissed her, desperate, tender, full of longing held too long in check. Cora responded with equal passion, her hands tangling in his dark hair. The kiss deepened, years of denial crumbling like ancient walls. They broke apart, both breathing hard. "We shouldn't, not until," Cora managed. "I know, but I needed you to know. Before tomorrow, whatever comes, you needed to know." Cora's confession tumbled out. "I loved you before I knew I loved you. Watching you with Ruby, seeing your pain, your gradual healing, I fell in love with a broken man learning to be whole again." He pulled her close, just holding her. "If they rule against us tomorrow, if they take Ruby, then we fight, and we keep fighting, together." The word sealed something between them. He kissed her forehead, her temple, her lips again softly, a promise without words that whatever happened, they would face it united. Mrs. Blackwood's discreet cough from the doorway interrupted. "Begging your pardon, your grace, but perhaps best to retire before the household awakens." Her knowing look held no disapproval. Actually, she seemed pleased. As Cora reluctantly departed, he whispered, "Tomorrow." Her reply echoed back, "Tomorrow." Morning arrived with unbearable tension. The crowded courtroom held its breath as Ruby sat between Duke and Cora, gripping both their hands. The lead magistrate stood, his expression unreadable. "We have considered testimony from all parties. Dr. Finch's medical assessment, while noteworthy, was based on a single observation. Lady Marguerite's concerns are understandable, but..." The Duke's hand gripped Cora's beneath the table, knuckles white. "However, we cannot ignore what we witnessed yesterday. Young Lady Ruby's testimony was most compelling. A child who finds her voice after 2 years of silence, who speaks with clarity about her healing. This speaks to recovery, not deterioration." The magistrate's gaze swept the courtroom. "Furthermore, while Miss Welch's family history is unconventional, we find no evidence she has compromised the Duke's judgment. Rather, evidence suggests her methods, though unorthodox, have been extraordinarily effective." He paused, letting tension build. "Guardianship remains with the Duke." Petition dismissed. The courtroom erupted. Marguerite's face went white with fury. "Doctor." Finch gathered his papers in defeat. Ruby burst into tears of relief, throwing her arms around both Duke and Cora. Over her copper head, their eyes met profound relief. "Love, promise," the magistrate added pointedly. "One final note: we commend Miss Welch for her dedication and strongly suggest the Duke ensure her position remains secure." His knowing look suggested tacit approval, if handled properly. Outside the courthouse, Marguerite confronted them one last time, her voice sharp with venom. "This isn't over, Gilberto. Society will not forgive this scandal. When you marry your governess, and you will, it's written all over both of you, you'll be ostracized." The Duke's reply was calm, certain. "Then we'll be ostracized together. Better that than the living death I endured before." Marguerite turned to Cora. "You've bewitched him. My sister would be ashamed." Cora's response was dignified, unflinching. "Your sister would want her daughter happy and her husband whole. I've helped give her both." Marguerite departed in fury, severing family ties. Ruby whispered, watching her go, "I'm glad she's gone. She didn't love me. She wanted to own me." They stood together on the courthouse steps, a family of three facing an uncertain but hopeful future, bound not by blood alone but by something stronger. Love forged in fire, tested by loss, and proven unbreakable. The journey back to Kent carried a lighter atmosphere despite their exhaustion. Ruby chatted incessantly, making up for 2 years of silence with stories, questions, laughter that filled the carriage like music. Duke and Cora exchanged warm glances over her copper head until Ruby suddenly asked, "Are you going to marry Cora, Papa?" The Duke nearly choked on surprise. "What makes you ask that, little one?" Ruby's wisdom was ancient beyond her 9 years. "Because you look at her the way you looked at Mama in the old paintings, before she got sad." Cora blushed, unable to meet anyone's eyes. The Duke grew serious. "Would that make you happy? If Cora became part of our family officially?" "Yes, then she can't ever leave." Cora's heart twisted, recognizing the fear beneath Ruby's enthusiasm. "I'm not leaving, Ruby. Married or not, I'm not leaving." But the seed was planted. Weeks passed with dramatic changes. The Duke ordered the East Wing renovated. Arabella's shrine-like rooms gently cleared and converted to a bright art studio for Ruby. Walls painted cheerful yellow, shelves filled with art supplies, natural light flooding through windows that overlooked the garden, not the lake. Ruby's artwork covered the walls, a visible progression from darkness to light. Her latest drawings included family portraits with Cora prominently featured. The gardens were restored. Overgrown roses pruned and thriving, weeds cleared, new plantings of lavender and hollyhocks perfuming the air. Even the lake area was transformed with seating and trimmed willows, the place of tragedy becoming a place of peace. The castle itself felt different. Servants smiled and chatted. Ruby's piano practice echoed through halls. Laughter replaced silence. Life had returned after years of stagnation. "You've brought this house back from the dead, Miss Welch," Mrs. Blackwood said with rare warmth. Cora's position remained ambiguous, technically still governess, but treated as the lady of the house. Society gossip swirled, but the Duke didn't care. His focus was Ruby's continued healing and planning the perfect proposal. "How does one propose to a woman who's already given you everything?" the Duke asked Mrs. Blackwood, who had become his unlikely ally. Her knowing smile was gentle. "You give her everything in return, Your Grace." He visited a London jeweler and selected an elegant emerald ring, not ostentatious, as Cora wouldn't want that surrounded by small diamonds. Inside, he had inscribed, "You taught me to live again." He planned the proposal for the library, where truth had first begun between them. Ruby, thrilled to be part of the plot, would deliver the message. The Duke's nervousness surprised him. This felt different from his proposal to Arabella decades ago. Cora knew his darkness and loved him anyway. No illusions, no pretense, just raw, honest love built on shared healing. On a golden autumn afternoon, nearly a year after Cora's arrival, Ruby delivered the message with barely suppressed giggles. "Papa requests your presence in the library, Miss Welch." Cora found him surrounded by wildflowers from the estate gardens, their shared favorite books spread out, candles lit despite the daylight. "You summoned me, Your Grace." Her teasing formality made him smile. He took her hands. "Cora, not Miss Welch, not Your Grace, just us." He led her to the spot where they'd stood during their confrontation about her father. "Do you remember standing here? I remember thinking I'd lose my position, that I'd gone too far. I remember thinking you were the first person who truly saw me since Arabella died, the first person brave enough to speak truth." His hands framed her face. "When I hired you, I thought I was employing someone to teach my daughter. I didn't know I was inviting someone who would teach me how to live again, who would show me that loving after loss isn't betrayal but testament to the heart's resilience." He knelt among the books and dust motes dancing in afternoon light. "Don't leave me. I'm begging you, don't leave us." He pulled out the ring box. "Not as governess or employee, but as my wife, if you'll have me, as Ruby's mother in truth as well as in heart. Help me turn this castle from a monument to grief into a home filled with love." Cora knelt with him, tears streaming. "I never intended to leave. From that first day, when Ruby looked at me with those ancient eyes, I was hers. And when you let down your walls enough to show me your heart, I was yours too. Yes, Gilberto, yes." He slid the ring onto her finger, a perfect fit. Their kiss was tender, full of promise and healing, the library shelves bearing silent witness to love born from sorrow but destined for joy. The door burst open. Ruby rushed in. "Did she say yes? Did she?" "Yes, I said yes. Ruby launched herself at them both. Their embrace in the middle of the library sealed what had been true for months. "Now we're really a family," Ruby exclaimed. "We've been a family for a while now, little one," the Duke said softly. "This just makes it official." They spent the evening planning their wedding, talking over each other, laughing, three people surrounded by books in warm lamplight, completely, impossibly happy. 1 year had passed since Duke Gilberto D. Quick married his daughter's governess in a quiet ceremony that defied society's expectations, but found happiness in the defiance itself. The summer morning of their anniversary dawned golden and perfect. Hever Castle had transformed into something it had never been. Even in Arabella's time, a true home, where laughter echoed freely, and love was the foundation of every day. On the breakfast terrace overlooking gardens in spectacular bloom, Ruby, now 11 and radiant with confidence, read aloud to her infant brother James. The baby gurgled appreciatively despite understanding nothing, his chubby fists waving in delight at his sister's animated voices. Cora, now Duchess in name as she'd been in heart for months, watched from the terrace with Gilberto's arm around her waist. The comfortable affection between them spoke of love deepened by time and trial. Her hand rested on the subtle curve of her belly, where their second child grew cautious joy, but joy nonetheless. "Do you ever regret it?" Gilberto asked softly. "Giving up your independence, taking on a ready-made family, the scandal that still follows your name?" Cora considered honestly. Some society ladies still cut her in London. Whispers followed them at the balls they occasionally attended. "The governess who married the Duke," said with disdain sharp as knives, but most people had accepted them. Ruby's undeniable happiness was evidence of the right choice. She turned in his arms, her smile radiant. "I regret nothing. I gained everything I never knew I wanted. A daughter who found her voice, a husband who found his heart, a home where love matters more than propriety." Mrs. Blackwood emerged with a tea tray, now friend rather than merely employee. "Your Grace, the anniversary gifts have arrived from well-wishers." Not all of society had rejected them. Progressive thinkers, other unconventional families, genuine friends, they had found their people. Ruby looked up from her reading and waved enthusiastically. "Mama, Papa, come hear the story. It's about a princess who saves herself." The significance wasn't lost on Cora. Ruby had internalized the lesson that she didn't need rescuing. She had rescued herself with help from those who loved her. They walked down to join her on the garden blanket, marveling at her transformation. She spoke freely now, her vocabulary advanced for her age. Vibrant, confident, creative. An art teacher came twice weekly to nurture her talent. Piano lessons progressed steadily. She played her mother's favorite songs now without sadness, only remembrance. Friends from neighboring estates visited regularly. Nightmares were rare. Her relationship with her father was completely restored, and she called Cora Mama as naturally as breathing. She doted on baby James with protective tenderness. Ruby's latest drawing lay beside her, a family portrait in bright watercolors showing Cora pregnant, everyone smiling, titled, "My Family, All of Us Together." "Do you think Mama would be happy for us?" Ruby asked suddenly, her copper braids gleaming in sunlight. Gilberto's answer was thoughtful, honest. "I think she would. She loved you above all else. She'd want you happy." Ruby nodded, satisfied. "I am happy, very happy." That simple statement meant everything. After lunch, they walked to the East Garden Lake, the first time all together since Ruby's crisis night. Ruby held both their hands without fear. The lake was peaceful now, swans gliding across its surface, dragonflies skimming like jeweled dancers. A new bench bore a plaque, "In memory of Arabella, beloved mother, forever remembered." Ruby's idea, honoring her mother without being haunted. They sat together, baby James on Cora's lap, the picture of a family at peace. "I used to think the lake took Mama away," Ruby said quietly. "But Cora taught me it was sickness, not place. Now I can look at it and remember good times, picnics here, feeding ducks." "That's very wise, Ruby," Gilberto said, his arm tightening around Cora. Cora added gently, "Your mother will always be part of you. The best parts, your creativity, your sensitivity, your beautiful spirit. But you're also your own person. You're Ruby, and Ruby is extraordinary." Ruby picked wildflowers and placed them at the water's edge, a private goodbye to her mother, a hello to her future. The moment was tender, symbolic. They had transformed pain into peace, death into life. That evening, with Ruby and baby asleep, The Duke and Cora found themselves alone in the library, their place, where truth had always lived between them. Gilberto took Cora's hand. "Thank you." "For what?" "For teaching me that employment of the heart is the only kind that truly matters. I hired you to teach Ruby. But you taught us all how to live again." Cora squeezed his hand. "Then we're even. You taught me that home isn't a place, it's people who refuse to let you face darkness alone." Their kiss was tender, full of shared history and future promise. Cora's hand moved to her growing belly. "This child will be born into love, not sorrow. Will know from first breath that family is about choosing each other every day. Just like we chose each other," Gilberto said. "Despite obstacles, despite scandal, despite everything that said we shouldn't. Best decision I ever made. Mine too." His voice was soft, echoing that desperate plea in the library a year ago. "Stay with me. Always." Cora's reply was immediate, certain. "Always. You never have to beg me. I'm yours. You're mine. We're each other's. Forever." They stood silhouetted in the library window, castle lights warm behind them, gardens visible in twilight as flowers closed for the night. Peace, completion, happiness, earned through struggle, all visible in that simple tableau. The Duke had employed her to teach his daughter to read. Instead, Cora had taught them all something far more valuable: how to transform grief into grace, loss into love, and brokenness into beauty. She had shown a broken family that healing wasn't about forgetting the past, but about honoring it while embracing the future. And in doing so, she had found what she'd been searching for her entire life: a place to belong, a purpose that mattered, and a love worth every scandal, every judgment, every obstacle they'd overcome together. This was home. This was family. This was forever. If this story of love, healing, and second chances moved you, please share it with someone who needs hope today. Leave a comment telling me which moment touched your heart most deeply. I treasure every response. And remember, sometimes the greatest love stories are the ones that save us when we're too broken to save ourselves.